Every time tensions rise in the Middle East, the world watches one thing above everything else: oil prices, shipping routes, the Strait of Hormuz, but almost no one is asking the more interesting question. Why would Iran suddenly declare the strait completely open right now at this specific moment? Because that announcement tells us far more about Iran's current position than any military threat ever could. So the real question is, what is Iran actually signaling here, and who is the message really for? This is independent geopolitical analysis and personal opinion only. All information is based on publicly available reports. I could be wrong. To understand why this matters, you need a quick picture of what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. It is a narrow waterway, roughly 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran and Oman. According to publicly available reports from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply passes through this strait. That includes enormous volumes from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar. If that strait closes or even appears threatened, global energy markets react within hours. Insurance costs spike, shipping companies reroute, governments panic. The strait is, in a very literal sense, one of the most important choke points on the planet, and Iran sits directly next to it. For decades, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz has been one of Iran's primary tools of leverage. Whenever sanctions tighten, whenever military pressure builds, whenever negotiations stall, Iranian officials remind the world that they have the geographic and military capability to disrupt global energy flows. It is a card they hold, and critically, a card they rarely actually play because the threat is more valuable than the action. So when Iran does the opposite, when it goes out of its way to declare the strait completely open and safe, that is not a routine statement, that is a deliberate signal, and it deserves serious attention. Here is what I think is really happening. Iran is not making this declaration from a position of strength. It is making it from a position of pressure. In recent months, Iran has faced an intensifying combination of economic strain, internal discontent, and a diplomatic environment that has shifted in ways that are not favorable to Tehran. Sanctions enforcement has tightened. The currency has remained under severe stress, and perhaps most importantly, Iran's regional network Hezbollah, the Houthis, various proxy forces has taken significant hits. The broader axis of resistance that Iran spent decades building has been weakened in ways that cannot be quickly rebuilt. When you are in that position, the last thing you want is to give the international community a fresh reason to escalate against you. Declaring the strait open is a de-escalatory gesture. It is Iran saying, "We are not looking for a confrontation right now." It is a message designed to reduce the temperature by some diplomatic room and signal to potential negotiating partners, particularly in Europe and indirectly in Washington, that Tehran is capable of responsible behavior when it chooses to be. But here is where it gets interesting. The timing of this declaration almost certainly connects to behind-the-scenes diplomatic movement. Public statements of this kind rarely happen in a vacuum. When a state makes a formal declaration about freedom of navigation through a critical waterway, it is usually coordinating that message with something else, a negotiating track, a back-channel conversation, or a shift in a relationship that has not yet become public. According to publicly available reports, there have been ongoing indirect communications between Iranian and American officials regarding nuclear-related discussions, mediated through intermediaries. There have also been reports of Gulf state diplomacy, particularly involving Oman and Qatar, both of which have historically played intermediary roles between Tehran and Western governments. It is reasonable to assess that this public declaration about the Strait of Hormuz is the visible public layer of a diplomatic process that is moving quietly underneath the surface. Iran is essentially putting a goodwill gesture on the table. Whether that gesture is reciprocated, and what form reciprocation might take, is the core question driving the next phase of this story. Most people are missing this part entirely. The declaration also has an audience inside the region, not just outside it. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have both pursued their own forms of normalization, or at least. With Iran over the past 2 years, the Abraham Accords reshaped Gulf dynamics in ways that pushed several Arab states to recalibrate their relationship with Tehran rather than continue an indefinite cold confrontation. Iran's Strait Declaration is also a message to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi: we are stable partners in the regional order. When treated as such, it reinforces the argument that engagement with Iran is more productive than isolation. This matters because Gulf states have significant influence over how the broader international community frames Iran right now. If Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not pushing for maximum pressure, the political will to maintain that pressure elsewhere weakens considerably. Iran understands this calculation and is playing into it deliberately. There is also a domestic dimension that rarely gets discussed in Western analysis. Iranian leadership is not a monolith. There are factions, competing interests, and real internal debates about how to manage the country's international position. A formal declaration that the strait is open and that Iran is not pursuing confrontation is also a signal from the current dominant faction to internal hardliners. We are managing this situation. Do not escalate unilaterally. The diplomatic track is in play. It is a way of asserting internal control over the narrative at a moment when economic pressure creates real incentives for radical moves. If this analysis is correct, here are 2 or 3 things worth watching closely over the next 30 to 60 days. Watch whether any formal or semi-formal nuclear-related talks are announced or confirmed. If Iran's Strait declaration is the public layer of a diplomatic process, the next visible sign would be an announcement of talks. A prisoner exchange or a sanctions waiver, even a limited one. These are the kinds of concrete signals that indicate a diplomatic track is genuinely active rather than performative. Watch how Gulf states respond. If Saudi Arabia or the way issues statements that echo or validate Iran's positioning, that tells you regional actors are coordinating around a de-escalation framework. If instead Gulf states remain cold or skeptical, it suggests the declaration is more tactical than strategic. And watch Iran's domestic economic indicators and currency movements. If behind-the-scenes negotiations are producing any tangible relief from sanctions pressure, you will see it first in the Iranian rial before any political announcement confirms it. Markets absorb information faster than governments announce it. This is independent analysis only, not news, and I could absolutely be wrong. Geopolitics involves incomplete information, and declarations can be tactical theater just as easily as genuine signals. But the pattern here, the timing, the framing, the diplomatic context suggests something more deliberate than a routine statement. If you want breakdowns that go beyond the headlines and try to map what is actually happening beneath the surface, subscribe and follow along, and I want to hear your read on this. Do you think Iran is genuinely signaling openness, or is this theater? Drop your analysis in the comments. All information in this video is based on publicly available reports and represents personal opinion and analysis only.